Right now, somewhere in the world, a president is making a decision. He thinks it is his decision. It is not. Somewhere in the world, a billion-dollar company is choosing its next CEO. They think they chose him. They didn't. Somewhere in the world, a war is ending. The generals think they negotiated the peace. They didn't negotiated anything. You did. From a room that doesn't exist. Using a name that has never been spoken out loud. To channels that no intelligence agency has ever detected. You don't exist. You never have. But right now, everything happening in the world is happening because of you. This is your life. Most people believe the world is run by governments, by presidents and prime ministers and kings, by armies and banks and corporations. They are wrong. Governments are the stage. The actors on that stage think they are in control. They are not. Behind every government, behind every major decision, behind every war that starts and every peace that holds, there are people you will never read about in any newspaper. People with no title, no office, no public face. People who exist only in the decisions they make and the outcomes they produce. You are one of those people, not the most powerful, not the least. Somewhere in the middle of a system so complex and so carefully hidden that most of the people inside it don't fully understand how it works. You don't have a job title, you don't have a salary, you don't have a contract or a business card or a LinkedIn profile. What you have is access. Access to systems, to people, to information, to levers of power that most human beings don't even know exist. And you know exactly how to use them. You don't exist, but you control everything. And today, we go through every level of how that happened. Level 1, the ordinary beginning. You were not born into power. There was no family legacy, no secret bloodline, no mysterious grandfather who whispered ancient knowledge into your ear before he died. You were ordinary, completely, entirely ordinary. You grew up in a mid-sized city, normal school, normal grades, not the smartest in your class, not the most popular, not the most anything, but you had one quality that nobody around you seemed to notice. You saw patterns, not in mathematics, not in science, in people, in the way people made decisions, in the gap between what people said they wanted and what they actually wanted, in the hidden motivations underneath every public action. You could watch a conversation between two people and immediately understand things about that conversation that neither person was aware of themselves. You went to university, studied political science, not because you were passionate about it, because it felt like the closest thing to a map of how the world actually worked. You were disappointed. University taught you the official version of power, elections, policies, international relations, the stage, not the machinery behind it. After graduation, you took a job at a small consulting firm, political risk analysis. You assessed situations in unstable regions for corporate clients who wanted to know where to invest and where to avoid. You were very good at it. Too good. Within 2 years, your reports were being read by people far above the pay grade of your clients. You didn't know that yet, but someone was reading everything you wrote, carefully, with great interest. And one afternoon, your manager called you into his office and told you that someone wanted to meet you. Not a client, not a government official, just someone. Your manager looked slightly uncomfortable when he said it. That was the first sign that something was different about this meeting. Level 2. The Introduction. Level 2. The introduction. The meeting was in a hotel, not a dramatic location, not a secret bunker or a private island or a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city skyline. Just a hotel, medium quality, the kind of place nobody notices or remembers. The man waiting for you was equally unremarkable. 60s, gray hair, comfortable clothes, the kind of face that disappears from memory the moment you look away from it. He introduced himself with the first name that you later confirmed was false. He knew everything about you, not just your work history, everything. Your childhood, your relationships. The paper you wrote in your second year of university that your professor called the most insightful analysis of soft power dynamics he had read from a student in 30 years. He quoted 3 sentences from that paper from memory. Then he put a single sheet of paper on the table between you. On it were 6 events, global events, political decision, corporate move, 1 military action, all from the past 4 years. He asked you what you noticed about them. You studied the list for 4 minutes. Then you told him they weren't independent events, they were sequential. Each one created the conditions for the next. Someone had planned them in a specific order to produce a specific outcome. An outcome that was now so embedded in global systems that it appeared completely natural. but it wasn't natural. It was engineered. He watched you figure this out in real time. When you finished, he nodded slowly. "We have been looking for someone like you for a long time," he said. "You asked what his organization did." He thought about the question for a moment. "We make sure things go the right way," he said. "You asked who decided what the right way was." He smiled. "We do," he said. "Would you like to help?" Level 3. Learning the system. Your training lasted 8 months. Not in any facility you could point to on a map. Not with any official curriculum or certification. You moved through a series of environments, cities, countries, private residences, corporate offices, government buildings that you entered through side doors, with people who showed credentials you never got a close look at. You met teachers who had no names, only areas of expertise. One taught you the architecture of financial systems. Not the official architecture, the real one. The hidden channels through which enormous amounts of money move invisibly between institutions and individuals and entities that officially don't exist. Another taught you the psychology of leadership, how leaders at the highest levels actually make decisions, the fears and vanities and blind spots that make even the most powerful people predictable if you know what to look for. A third taught you communication, not languages, channels. The unofficial networks through which real information moves between real power centers, networks that exist entirely outside official diplomatic and corporate structures. By month 3, you understood something that changed the way you saw everything. The world had 2 layers. The visible layer was what most people experienced. Elections, markets, news, policy, the things that appeared to happen naturally as the result of human decisions and historical forces. The invisible layer was the machinery, the deliberate, careful, patient application of pressure at specific points to produce specific outcomes. Most people in the visible layer had no idea the invisible layer existed. Some people in the visible layer had suspicions. Journalists, academics, certain politicians. They were managed, not silenced, just redirected, given enough of the truth to feel informed, not enough to see the full picture. By month 8, you had seen the full picture, and you understood your role within it. You were not going to be an actor on the stage. You were going to be someone who adjusted the stage itself, quietly, invisibly, permanently. Level 4 First Operation. Your first real operation was in a small country, not a powerful country, not one that most people could find on a map without help, but a country that sat on top of something extremely valuable, and a country whose next election would determine who had access to that value for the next generation. There were 2 candidates. One was acceptable to the people your organization worked with. One was not. Your job was not to rig the election. Rigging elections was crude, detectable, the kind of thing that created investigations and journalists and international incidents. Your job was to shape the environment around the election so that the acceptable candidate won naturally. You spent 4 months on it. You identified the 3 issues that voters in that country cared most about. Then you worked through a network of local contacts, none of whom knew who they were ultimately working for, to ensure that those 3 issues dominated public conversation in ways that favored your candidate. You arranged for certain pieces of information about the other candidate to become available to certain journalists. True information, carefully selected, timed precisely. You worked with financial contacts to ensure that your candidate had access to resources and the other candidate faced unexpected difficulties. You identified 12 key influencers, community leaders, religious figures, local media personalities. Through intermediaries, you created situations where each of them independently arrived at the conclusion that supporting your candidate was in their interest. Election day, your candidate won with 54% of the vote. The international community called it a clean democratic result. It was. Technically, every vote was real. Every voter made their own choice. You had simply spent 4 months carefully and invisibly shaping the information and environment those voters lived in. You watched the results on a laptop in a hotel room in a different country entirely. Then you closed the laptop and opened the next file. Level 5. The weight of it. 3 years in, you began to feel something you hadn't expected. Not guilt, not exactly. Weight. Every decision you influenced had consequences that spread outward in ways you could not fully track or predict. You could engineer an election outcome, but you could not engineer everything that followed from that outcome. The candidate you helped win in that small country implemented policies you hadn't anticipated, some good, some not. A financial intervention you had designed to stabilize a market in one region had created instability in another region that your models hadn't accounted for. You raised this with your handler. He was a different person by now. Your original contact had moved to a different role. This handler was younger, more precise, less patient. All systems have unintended consequences, he said. Our job is to optimize for the intended ones. You understood the logic, but you started keeping your own records, not the organization's records. Your own, personal, encrypted, hidden in systems that had no connection to anything the organization knew about. You recorded every operation you had been part of, the intended outcomes, the actual outcomes, the gap between them. You told yourself it was for analysis, for learning. That was partly true, but it was also something else: insurance. You had been inside this system long enough to understand something important. Organizations like this one did not have members who left voluntarily. You left when they decided you should leave, or you didn't leave at all. You had watched 2 people disappear from the organization during your 3 years. Not dramatically, they were simply no longer there. No explanation, no farewell, just gone. When you asked your original handler about one of them early in your time, he looked at you with an expression you had filed away carefully. Not threatening, not cold, just completely indifferent. As if the person you were asking about had never really mattered. You understood then that you needed a plan, and you started building one. Level 6. The crisis. In your 4th year, the organization gave you the largest operation of your career. A major democratic nation, not a small country this time, one of the largest economies in the world. A political movement had emerged that threatened several of the long-term arrangements your organization had spent decades building. Not a dangerous movement, not an extremist one, just inconvenient. It asked questions about transparency and accountability that, if they became mainstream, could pull threads that your organization very much needed to remain untouched. Your job was to manage the movement, not destroy it. Managing was always preferable to destroying. Redirect it, dilute it, absorb its energy into channels that produce noise without producing change. You designed the operation carefully. It was the most sophisticated thing you had ever built. 42 separate actions across 9 months, each one small and deniable on its own. Together, a systematic dismantling of a political movement that the people inside that movement would never fully understand had happened to them. Halfway through the operation, you discovered something. The movement's central figure, a young politician, woman, early 30s. She was more than inconvenient. She had somehow obtained documents, real documents, from inside systems that should have been completely inaccessible to anyone outside the organization. You didn't know how she had them, but if she released them, the consequences would be severe. Your handler told you to add her to the operation. Make her a problem that discredits itself, he said. You understood what that meant. You had done it before. You sat with the file for 2 days. She had 3 children. She had obtained those documents because she genuinely believed what she was doing was right. She wasn't wrong. On the 3rd day, you made a decision. You completed the operation as designed, but you also sent an anonymous message to the young politician, telling her exactly where to hide the documents so that they would survive whatever happened to her. Level 7. The Reckoning. They found out within a month. You had expected 6 weeks. They were faster than you anticipated. You came back to your secure system one morning to find a single message with no greeting, no explanation, just a meeting location, a time, and 1 sentence underneath. Attendance is not optional. You had been preparing for this moment for 18 months. Your insurance file was complete, comprehensive, detailed enough to be genuinely dangerous to everyone it named, stored in multiple locations through a system that required your active monthly input to remain contained. You went to the meeting. The room had 4 people in it. You recognized 2 of them. The other 2 you had never seen before, but understood immediately from their posture and their stillness, who they were and what their presence meant. The oldest person in the room spoke. You have been making independent decisions, he said. That is not what you are here for. You agreed that it was not. He asked why you had done it. You told him the truth. Because some of the decisions were wrong. Long silence. Then he asked the question you had been waiting for. What would it take for this to not become a problem? You placed a single sheet of paper on the table. On it were 3 things. A description of your insurance file and its release mechanism. A list of the independent decisions you had made and your reasoning for each one. And a proposal, not for your exit. You knew exit wasn't possible. A proposal for a different role. One with more autonomy, more oversight of your own operation, more ability to apply your own judgment. The oldest man picked up the paper, read it carefully, looked at you for a long moment. Then he nodded very slightly. Level 8. The new arrangement, the new role had no title. It never would. But it was different from what you had done before. Before you had been an instrument, given operations, given parameters, given acceptable outcomes and sent to produce them. Now, you were something closer to an architect. You sat above individual operations. You looked at longer time frame, decades instead of years. You identified the places where the organization's activities were producing outcomes that would eventually become unstable, unsustainable, dangerous, and you redesigned them. Not out of idealism. The organization had no interest in idealism, and neither did you anymore. Out of pragmatism, systems that produced too much visible harm eventually generated resistance that was harder to manage than the original problem. You had seen it happen. You had watched operations that were designed to be permanent unravel because they had created too much damage in too many directions. You built a framework for longer-term thinking. Your handler presented it to the senior level of the organization as his own work. You let him. That was the arrangement. You did the thinking. Others took the credit. You kept the insurance. The balance held. Years passed. You moved cities several times. Never stayed anywhere long enough to build visible connections. Never used the same identity for more than 3 years. You had no family, no close friends, no relationships that could be used as leverage. That was the cost. You had understood it going in. Some mornings you sat by a window and wondered what a different life would have looked like. Then you opened your system and started working, because the alternative was not an alternative. You didn't exist, but everything ran through you, and that was enough. E.N. Dean. You are older now. Not old, but older than the person who walked into that unremarkable hotel and sat down across from an unremarkable man and looked at a list of 6 events on a single sheet of paper. You understand things now that you couldn't have understood then. Power is not what most people think it is. Most people think power is visible, loud, dramatic. The person standing at the podium, the general commanding the army, the CEO announcing the acquisition. Real power is silence. Real power is the decision made before the meeting happens that determines what the meeting will conclude. Real power is invisible by design, because the moment power becomes visible, it becomes vulnerable. You have spent years being invisible. It has cost you things you cannot fully calculate, but it has also given you something that very few human beings in history have ever had: a clear view of how the world actually works. Not the version in the newspapers, not the version in the history books, not the version that governments present to their citizens or that corporations present to their shareholders, the real version. And from that view, the world is not what most people think it is. It is more fragile, more engineered, more dependent on the decisions of small numbers of people in invisible rooms than anyone comfortable wants to believe. You sit in one of those rooms. You don't exist. You never have. But right now, somewhere in the world, something is happening, and it is happening because of you.